Press record. Great stuff. So, yeah, thank you, Josh, for being here. So excited to hear this presentation on the structure of Web 3.0. I love that little logo you created there. I'm sure this is part of your talent. I'm not going to introduce Josh because he knows himself far better than I know him, and I'm excited to hear from Josh today. I know he has been on the circuit presenting in London and various other places on this topic, and I picked it up, I don't know where, and thought, wow, that sounds super fascinating. So really appreciate you being here to share your knowledge and wisdom with us today, and have at it. Excited to see you. Thanks, Josh.
Great. Thank you so much, Janet. I'm very excited to be here and very excited to present to you all today. As Janet mentioned, I am based in Paris, but my company Amplinate is based out of the USA, and we do inclusive research and design. And I'm the CEO of the company. Before that, I was at Microsoft for many, many years, and we have a whole group of people that are former Amazon, Microsoft, and Google people. But this particular presentation came from a conference that I was just at in London on Web3. And this is with a group that I speak with very frequently called Tech Circus. And they have different conferences that they put on in kind of niche areas like fintech, but they also have like NFT and crypto and Web3 and UX kinds of in business and design conferences. And I've spoken at several different ones. And when they asked if I would be willing to speak at the Web3 conference, my first thought was, well, I don't know what Web3 is, so but yes, that sounds interesting. And as I started digging in to learning more about what Web3 is, it's kind of all of the things, all of the new things. So, and I think that just as a kind of ground setting for part of this talk, my goal is not to define what Web3 is or look too much at all of the specifics of what it can be. However, to start with, Web3 is kind of an umbrella term for Internet of Things, AI, NFTs, cryptocurrencies and Bitcoin, and the spatial web. And so it's kind of all of these things together. And really it's looking at the future of the web and the metaverse and how we are building that future. So digging into this area was really, really fun for me because I've been working on doing research on the internet or the internet related things for the last 20 years. And as I started looking into what this presentation could be, I was thinking about things that inspired me the most. And if maybe question for each of you to ponder a little bit, like, is there a novel or a poem or a piece of music or perhaps a film that has changed your life so drastically that you can't remember a time before that where you saw the world differently from then on? So for me, that was a film, and that was The Matrix from 1999. And The Matrix came out, and I was in undergrad, and I was studying music composition, and I was studying poetry. And all of a sudden, this Matrix movie comes along, and I was like blown away by this idea of the role of philosophy and the role of asking really hard questions and thinking about the truth of reality. And it is that idea of the question that drives us is one of the lines from the film. And I'll go into more of the plot later, but the idea of the question that drives us is something that really stuck with me and helped me along my path towards becoming a researcher. And so as a researcher, I started digging into our human relationship with technology. And that started with doing usability for websites on the internet, or that was usability on apps, or on tablet apps, on phone apps, on foldable devices. And over the years, I've really been focusing on communication and productivity and content consumption across all the devices and the technology that we have in our lives. And so it's with this context that I'm looking at, okay, I've done all of this work in the past, looking at our human relationship with technology. And right now we're in an inflection point where we start looking at what are the new technologies that are being developed and how are those changing our human relationships with technology. So I started digging into more thinking about the idea of a revolution, because in the context of the tech industry, especially, we keep talking about products as being revolutionary. And what does that really mean? So from a scientific perspective, I had always wanted to dig in more to Thomas Kuhn and the structure of scientific revolutions. This is a work he published in 1962, where he goes through a process of defining what he calls a paradigm shift. And in the research and design realm, we can look at paradigms similarly as we would to mental models. And he goes through this progression, and I'm actually going to move forward and then move backwards because it makes more sense when you start with the examples in mind. So when you look at scientific revolutions, there are examples such as the printing press, the Copernican revolution, the Newtonian revolution, chemical revolution. And all of these are examples. I'm going to use the geocentric to heliocentric theory of the Copernican revolution as my example here from the 16th century. And I'm going to talk through Thomas Kuhn's process. So we start with normal science. And in normal science, you have activities that are performed within normal science that are also performed within the existing paradigm. And this is just to say that the paradigm is the lens through which we view the world. And like I said, like a mental model. And it guides us in understanding the world around us. Now, as we're collecting data, and so the normal science of the time of the geocentric theory was the Earth is the center of the universe. And then Galileo develops the telescope and the scientific method, and he looks up into the stars and he starts plotting the movement of the planets. And he came across this anomaly where the planets, as you were looking, would go backwards, and he called it, there was called epicycles, and they would go, make a little loop and then keep going forward again. And over time, as more and more anomalies are coming up in your data, you find these anomalies as being unable to be explained by something. Like, it doesn't make sense. Of course, in the context of the heliocentric theory, it makes sense. But in a geocentric model, if the planets have orbits that are going backwards and then forwards again, it's kind of odd. And so that's what leads to the crisis. As soon as you have so many anomalies in your data that you can't ignore them anymore. If it's just one, you can say, oh yeah, that's just an outlier, or that's just, there's one anomaly, but everything else fit in this area, so it's okay. But over time, if the anomalies start accumulating, you can't ignore them anymore. And that's what leads to the revolution. And the revolution, in this sense, the scientific revolution, is not necessarily a good thing. It's a very difficult thing. And during the time of revolution, you had people in the geocentric paradigm saying, no, this can't be true because the Earth is the center. I know this to be true, for whatever reason that epistemologically they believe that to be true. And then you create, during the revolution, you create this new paradigm, like, no, actually the sun is the center of the universe and of the solar system. And our Earth orbits the sun, not the sun orbits the Earth. And during that time where both paradigms kind of exist, they can't really exist at the same time, because the thought can only be existing in one paradigm. So you reject the old paradigm to embrace the new. And that's what the paradigm shift is. It's the fundamental change in the way that we see the world. And once we move to a new paradigm, we're unable to see the world through the lens of the former one. as an example, we can't see the universe, the solar system of where we are on the Earth as the center anymore. We see it with the sun in the center. And this has happened pretty regularly every century, with a couple different elements happening in the 20th century. And the information age revolution is another one, where the storing and processing of data is another example of how we have changed our model of how we see the world. So all of this is background and context to thinking about how we think about the future. And as we're looking at what our paradigms are, we can ask ourselves two questions to understand what paradigm that we're existing in. And those questions are, what is expected? And what is the purpose or final cause, to use the Aristotelian phrase? As we are existing in the paradigms that we're in now, and creating a future of new technology that can potentially change the way that we see the world, I started breaking it out into this model of breaking it out between the physical world and the virtual world. And in the virtual world, I would also count like the metaverse and any kind of AR, VR as part of that. And then there are optimistic and pessimistic views of technology. So where I'm going is that I'm going to take a little tour of this 2x2 through philosophers in the past and looking at our philosophic relationship with technology. And then I'm going to move into the future and looking at the future through the lens of science fiction. Because as Isaac Asimov said, science fiction is future science fact. So starting in the bottom right, this is the physical world and the realm of an optimistic view of the role of technology. We'll start with Aristotle and the Nicomachean Ethics. He talks about art and techne as art or craftsmanship is a reasoned and true state of capacity to produce with regard to the things that are capable of being otherwise. It is concerned with the production of the things that can be other than they are, and its aim is not the production of the things themselves, but the exercise of the craft. This is from chapter 4, and he actually opens the work by saying that all art and craftsmanship is building towards the good. And so from a lens of how we can look at our relationship to technology, Aristotle gives us this lens of human ingenuity and craftsmanship and art and being that which is the best capacity to produce. That technology is something that helps us as humans to be better humans. Moving to the bottom left, we're still in the physical world, but maybe a more pessimistic view of the role of technology. I'm going to go to Robert Pirsig and his philosophic novel Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance from 1974. In the novel, Robert Pirsig and his son are on a motorcycle trip with their friends, John and Sylvia. And there's a moment at the very beginning, near the beginning of the novel, where John and Sylvia's motorcycle breaks down and they don't know how to fix it. And he writes, it's not the motorcycle maintenance, it's all of technology they can't take. Of course, John signs off every time the subject of cycle repair comes up, even when it is obvious he is suffering for it. To get away from technology out into the country in the fresh air and sunshine is why they are on the motorcycle in the first place. And this passage really struck me because for me, it brings up this idea of our relationship to technology and also our human agency of where technology fits in our lives. Is it going to be something that we can move to the far end of the spectrum and say, technology is something that is not for me, like in the novel, his friends John and Sylvia, and actively avoid technology? The motorcycle breaking down is really a metaphor for how we choose our relationship to technology. And if it's something that we get away from, it can actually end up hurting us, because in the case of the novel, if your motorcycle breaks and you can't fix it, you're stuck. And so there's this relationship that we can have. And I think that we're all probably on this spectrum somewhere, from Ludditism to technophilia, and the role that we allow technology to be in our lives. Moving to the virtual world, I'm gonna move on to Baudrillard, who is a little crazy and off the deep end probably for most people. I came across him in grad school looking at media studies, and his work Simulacra and Simulation from 1981 was actually one of the work that the Wachowskis gave to all of the actors in The Matrix to read as they were filming. And Baudrillard is coming from a place, a much more pessimistic view of the virtual world, or what he calls the hyper-real. And he defines the hyper-real as a sign without referent, a simulation without an original, a copy without a real. It's the generation by models of a real without origin or reality, a hyper-real. And if it sounds confusing, it is. But he was looking at it from the context of media studies and advertisements. And he later wrote and compared the internet to this idea of the hyper-real as well. The idea that when you see an image of something, that it becomes more real than the thing itself. And in a world where we are in a virtual world like the internet or the metaverse, we're confronted with images of things that aren't existing in the physical world. And the copy of the original becomes the thing that is more real than the original itself. It's like the idea of a picture of the Mona Lisa existing in the digital world is more real than the physical object of the actual painting. Unless you're in front of it, you're only seeing the copy. He goes on, again, a little bit off the deep end, and has a whole book that he wrote about how the Gulf War didn't take place, which of course sounds absurd. But his point is that if we only consume this idea through television, did it really exist? Or does our understanding of that event only exist because we perceived it through technological media, technological mediation, really? And so in this case, the hyper-real informs how the Wachowskis wrote and directed The Matrix, which we'll get to. Moving back to a more positive perception of the role of technology, I have Martin Heidegger's Question Concerning Technology from 1954. And Heidegger talks about technology as something that shapes our understanding of the world, that influences us and challenges us to examine our relationship with it. He says, everywhere we remain unfree and chained to technology, whether we passionately affirm or deny it. Yes, I know this doesn't sound exactly positive, but the part that I think is really optimistic about the role is that technology is something that we engage with. That technology is something that we actively choose to be a part of and to passionately affirm, deny its role in our lives. This is kind of the opposite to Robert Pirsig, where escapism becomes this way of avoiding technology that ends up hurting us. Heidegger is saying we should embrace this as something and come to terms with it because we have the agency to do that. So building it out into this 2x2, you can see in the physical realm, we have human ingenuity versus escapism. And then in the virtual world, we have the hyper-real versus an active engagement in how we approach technology. So again, I'm weaving this idea of paradigms existing that are coming from these four philosophers, and I'm sure that there are more that talk about. There's certainly a lot more that I considered, but these are the ones that I thought made the most sense in terms of embodying these realms. And we can look at all of the technology that we've built in the past through one of these lenses or through one of these paradigms or mental models, and evaluate how the role of technology exists for us humans. Moving towards the future, I'm going to be looking through to the future paradigms that exist through the lens of science fiction. As Ray Bradbury talks about, science fiction is any idea that occurs in the head and doesn't exist yet, but soon will, and will change everything for everybody, and nothing will ever be the same again. And to me, this sounds a lot like a paradigm or a paradigm shift that can possibly be happening, as we are the ones that are conducting the research and design to help inform the creation of these new technologies. We are literally the ones that are actively engaged with the future of our human relationship with technology. So we have a lot of power, and with great power comes great responsibility. So let's start with Terminator 2. Probably the biggest fear in technology, in Web3, but more specifically in AI, is this idea of the singularity. The idea that AI will become sentient and it will turn against us, or in the sense of confrontation, the role of technology is something to confront us, that is something that will gain its own independence in singularity and then literally battle against us. And I chose Terminator 2 for this quadrant. This is the bottom left, physical world pessimistic. And I chose Terminator 2 because in the role of the film, the first Terminator, this is spoiler alert if you haven't seen the Terminator films, the plot of the first film is that Terminator has been sent backwards in time. The Terminator is this machine, a sentient AI machine that has been sent back in time to kill Sarah Connor because her son, John Connor, is really important. The Terminator is killed at the end, and then Terminator 2, in the plot line of the story, the machines have become sentient and had gone to war against the humans. And during the war, John Connor, Sarah Connor's son, sends back a Terminator to save himself from another Terminator that got sent back in time at the same time to kill him. And so in this idea, we can look at technology through this lens of confrontation, that we are always going to be confronted with technology, that we're always going to be battling against it, and that we're always going to be at war. It doesn't get much better when we start looking at what the pessimistic view of the role of technology is in the virtual world, which, if you haven't guessed it already, is also from the Matrix. And the paradigm of the Matrix is that of deception. So similarly to Terminator 2, the war with the machines, the sentient AI happens, and then there's a war similar to in Terminator 2. However, at the end of the war, in the plot of the Matrix, humans are enslaved and put in these pods, and we have reality kind of jacked into our heads to produce this virtual reality that we all live in and think is real. And if that also sounds familiar, it's probably because there are a couple other things going on here too. One, Plato's allegory of the cave from the Republic, where Plato's looking at what is real and how do we know what is real. And the Rene Descartes and the I think, therefore I am. And for Descartes, the example was, of course, that I could doubt everything in the world, but if I doubt everything, I still know that I'm thinking. And I know that I'm the one that's thinking, therefore I must exist. And yet, deception, even still being a role in Cartesian philosophy, in the role of the matrix, you can still be deceived. And you can still be deceived in this brain in a vat type of theory. So getting back to the paradigm of deception, that in the virtual world, our relationship with technology is that technology is here to deceive us, and that is exemplified in the plot of the film Matrix. So let's move to something a little bit more positive next. And to that, I'm going to turn to Ready Player One. I have two dates here. The book was published in 2012. And of course, maybe some of you have read the book. Maybe some of you have seen the movie from 2018. Personally, I chose a photo from the movie, but I personally like the book slightly better because it's a bit deeper. It's a bit darker. And some of the references have changed that I personally like. Some of the references from the 80s in the book a bit more. But however, if you're not familiar with Ready Player One, you should absolutely read or watch this. It's really fantastic. This is an optimistic view of the role of humans in society in the virtual world. So in the logic of Ready Player One, the real world, the physical world, has become a very desolate place. There's a lot of poverty. It's a very difficult place to live. And the virtual world that they live in, called the Oasis, is a place of connection where the main characters go to school to learn, they connect and hang out with each other, and they do their homework and they have adventures. And they that is not to say that all of the movie is, positive, happy, wonderful things. Of course, there's a lot of things going on here. But in terms of the relationship with technology is a place where we go to connect with other humans. And that's a really beautiful idea, that we can connect with others in a way that is really powerful and that changes and improves our life through a virtual world. Then moving back to the physical world, the movie Elysium from 2013 with Matt Damon. Now in the film, Matt Damon's character is exposed to radiation, and has several days, and he's going to die. But we have the technology that exists to heal him. It is in the world of Elysium, which you can see in the top left, in orbit of the Earth. Again, the physical world is in a bad place, but in this city of Elysium, they have created a paradise of sorts. And he gets this exoskeleton attached to him. So this is a place for, in terms of our paradigm, it's really a place of integration, of how do we integrate technology with our human physical bodies. This is the quadrant of the cyborg. And it brings up a lot of really interesting ethical considerations. And there could be a whole other ethical lens on I think, a lot of these discussions in terms of humanism and transhumanism, and what is a human, what is a machine, do machines have rights, at what point, etc. But this is the place where, when we look at how we can incorporate technology and what our relationship with that technology is, it's something to integrate with our humanity, into our biology even. And that exists today in the sense of pacemakers, for one, all the way, and that's actually integrated into our bodies, and etc. So again, we can plot this out into the 2x2, and again, looking at this role of our paradigms in technology. Is technology there to rule us or to use us? Or is it there to bring us together or become part of us? And this is the space that, as we're building new technologies in the future, right now and in the future, we're able to be more intentional about the way that we interact with it. So a big question comes up as to whether this is just an evolution of things that have already existed before, or is this a revolution in the Thomas Kuhn sense of the word revolution? Are these paradigms that we're taking from the past and applying to our futures, Are they just going to be the same, or are we going to somehow actually change our relationship to technology so drastically that, like the geocentric to heliocentric theory, are we going to be unable to see our relationship to those technologies the same way in the future? And I've listed a few different places here to kind of think about. So in terms of AI, we can look at things like data processing and discovery, personalization, automation. NFTs change our relationship to ownership and identity and what those terms mean. Blockchain and decentralization and security change the way that we interact with those technologies. And then, of course, virtual reality changes our entire interaction paradigm. The spatial web is literally the convergence of the virtual and the physical world. And creating this convergence can change the way that our technology relates to the physical world. And then if you have any smart devices, like maybe an Alexa or smart devices in your home, they enhance our interaction with technology in the physical realm. So these are all different spaces to play around with in terms of our thinking and our ability to create these new technologies. As John Connor says in Terminator 2, the future is not set. There's no fate, but what we make for ourselves. And this is the inflection point that we're in now, because we are the ones that are creating these new futures. So if you had the choice, would you want to create a future of technology that embraces our ability to have agency over that choice? Or are you coming from a more pessimistic mindset about our relationship to technology and want to just save us from hurting ourselves or save us from combating that technology? So I'm going to end with two questions. Which technological paradigms are you ready to reject, embrace, or create? And how does the product that you're working on change our relationship with technology? It is with these questions that we can start to identify the paradigms that we have currently and be more intentional about challenging those paradigms as we create the technology of the future. Thank you very much. And I'm going to leave you with one more slide here that I'll leave up for a little bit in case some of you want to take notes. But these are a bunch of the other films that I considered for putting together this talk. And I'm going to continue adding to this over time because this has been really fun. So thank you.
Wow. I think you just blew my mind, actually.
Oh, wow. Okay, great.
This is fascinating. I'm not a science fiction person, and I'm loving this analogy that you have decided to hook your theories onto, and it's made it very visceral and very, very real for me. Thank you for sharing that. I can see an awful lot of time and effort went into to putting this together as well. I mean, where is your film knowledge? Did you go to film school, or is it just a passion? Or
it's just a passion.
It's a passion.
It's just a passion. I really love science fiction.
Fantastic. Wow. Do we have some other science fiction lovers here in this room? Yeah. Yeah. Oh my goodness. Where do you see the meta? I noticed you didn't have the metaverse per se on your spectrum. That's my question. Where does that fit? Does that feel sort of like it's very close in to?
Yeah, I put it in with VR.
Okay.
Virtual reality. Yeah, I put the metaverse right there too. It's our interaction paradigm of how we actually interact with technology, and that can be, through gesture, through voice, or other things. But that's kind of where I put it. And this is more it's not like meant to be taken literally. Like, is NFTs more virtual than blockchain, no, it doesn't really matter. So they're just kind of on there.
Yeah, got you. And actually, I remember seeing a presentation probably 4 years ago now at QRCA conference about blockchain and the role it could play in recruitment, actually. And each of us, there could be no fraud in the future because blockchain would be the way that we would be able to track the truth about the human beings that we were going to be speaking to. And
yeah.
And I've yet to see that actually infiltrate. We're still discussing the same fraud issues, right, in the research world, just to bring it back to today's reality.
Yeah.
So I'd love to know everybody else's thoughts on this presentation. Jesse, I'm guessing you've got some thoughts.
Dude, thanks, Josh. Now I feel like I gotta go watch all those movies again because it blows my mind. I was saying in the chain, and obviously some folks probably aren't aware of it, and maybe Josh knows it, but there's a horrible movie with a fantastic book series of Ender's Game. And I think Josh's whole presentation just with that series and thinking of what he's doing with this.
I interestingly have a podcast episode that'll be coming out at some point soon where I talk about Ender's Game in this framework as well. So and I recently rewatched that. It's not on the 2x2 yet, but yeah, it's definitely like it's difficult to know kind of where to put it because there are some philosophic problematic issues, which I won't mention maybe because if anyone hasn't seen it, there's a big spoiler.
Huh. Now we're going to see that one too. Oh my God.
Yeah.
Again, Janet, the movie's not very good. The books.
The books.
Yeah.
It's hard for the movies to seldom is the movie better than a book. Although I feel in this sphere, the movie should always be better than the book because of the visual representation of such complex ideas that surely in movie making, we can bring it alive in a way that's so visceral. I actually, your example that stuck with me of the Gulf War and was it even real? You know, if I didn't happen to know somebody who fought in it, like, how do I know? You know, if I hadn't heard their stories firsthand, yeah, totally. Afghanistan war, was it real? I never went there, and I saw a presentation from a journalist who had spent 14 years covering that war, and her challenge was, how do you get people to even care anymore? They're so fed up with, because war is this endless iteration of the same issues. People die, people get killed, you know, civilians get killed, and so the news becomes repetitive and boring and dull, and nobody stays interested. The war matters, you know. And this poor journalist was sort of like, help me, marketers, how do I, you know, get people to, you know. Anyway, interesting. But Laura,
yeah,
back and I mean, I know, and Laura, you've got some really thoughtful people here, like, and I'm really interested in your perspectives on that presentation.
Please.
You guys go.
Yeah, can I ask a question? So first of all, I loved your presentation. I think it was really, mind-opening, so thank you so much for putting it together. I know how long it takes to pull these things together too. So my question is that, as you're talking to companies or you're talking to people with this approach, right, about thinking about the future, you use the movie analogy as a way to kind of like really bring it to life. In my experience, I've come across two different profiles of people: those who get really energized by it, like people on this call most likely, right? And then there are the people who are very afraid of it, right? And the people who are afraid are the ones who tend to, whether they're the majority or minority is irrelevant, but they tend to be very vocal about it at times. I'm curious to hear what are your thoughts about that, and what have you seen as you've been building out this kind of thinking, basically? So
yeah, I think what's interesting is that, like, you definitely see people that are coming from one of those two, like, optimistic or pessimistic camps. Yeah. Like it's very real. I think that from the experts, there are some that are very worried about singularity, and then there's also a lot of people that are just making a lot of noise. And I think that it's for me, it's about separating out, like, okay, these are like philosophers and like people that are experts in the realm of AI, I'm going to listen to them more than people that are just spouting crazy on either side. But I think what matters is creating an informed opinion about it and doing the work to really think about it. And I also think that even if the reality from a pessimistic perspective that the singularity can be something that really hurts us as a human race, we're not there yet, and the opportunity still exists that we create technology in such a way that we protect humanity. And I think that you can come from a place of optimism or pessimism about the role of technology and still create technology that's going to be for the best of humans, even from either perspective. And maybe that makes us highlight some things more than others. But I really want to just come back to this idea of like, let's understand what the real arguments are, do what's best from for humanity, for what we believe that can be, and continue to learn with time. And I think that the research and design process is iterative, and when we have a bunch of scientists doing something, you get a different perspective than if you have a bunch of developers doing something. And right now in the space of technology, and especially new technology, we have developers building lots of interesting things. And I think the philosophers are coming in and saying, like, let's think about this. And that's why we have this role of like AI and ethics that's really coming out as a conversation in the industry. And I think that it's just important that we are all intentional about it and doing the work to really like think deeply about what we can control.
If I could just ask a follow-up, make a comment and a question, I agree with everything you're saying, but that requires people to invest time to do that. Layperson doesn't, they see it on a Twitter feed or hear it in the news or whatever, and they, sound bites rules the day, as we know, right? I almost think like, so I'm doing a lot of work from the opposite side, which is like, how does stigma start affecting brands and products and things like that. I'm kind of like approaching it from that. And one of the ideas that I'm toying in my head links to something you said actually, which is actually Newton, where I'm almost calling it like Newton's third law of motion, where for every action there's an equal and opposite reaction. So every new disruption or new shift that happens, you will get a reaction from those naysayers for a while, right? Until the momentum shifts again, right? So if you think about, the one I'm kind of like observing right now, not related to technology, is this whole thing around diversity, equity, and inclusion. Years ago it took off, right after George Floyd. Let's say, right, that was an inflection point. But look what's happening this year. You're seeing the complete reaction of people wanting to divest out of DEI. Something happened in the news this morning also, with the military, blah, 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 right? So I just wonder if that also is happening in this space, with technology shifts as well. And I'm just wondering if, we could take the rules of, physics or the rules of science and actually apply it to human behavior also, and not just the physical realm,
There's a sense that there's like a pendulum swing. And I think we're seeing that happen in the tech industry as well. And to your point, I wonder if there's a pendulum swing that happens as well, where it shifts back and forth between two ends of the spectrum. Maybe we're going to align on something. Or maybe the pendulum will just keep shifting.
Or maybe the pendulum is moving much faster than what we're all used to as well. So.
Or it's going really far in one direction and then equally far in the other direction. Exactly. And then you get these like two endpoints that are like really far away from each other.
Yep. So thank you.
Thank you.
Mac, you had a question too.
And maybe more of a comment than a question. Josh, thank you. That was absolutely brilliant and well prepared and superbly presented. When you look at a paradigm, and a paradigm is a set of rules and boundaries, and we are meant to behave within that set of rules and boundaries. What's impressed me with the particular set of changes we're seeing now is that they are moving so quickly that they don't really settle down long enough to define the rules and boundaries.
Yeah.
Now, granted, the Darwinistic revolution is actually still happening in some places of the world and the United States. But in this particular case, because you could say that with the advent of a lot of AI, the writer's strike, ChatGPT visiting Congress, Sarah Silverman's intellectual property lawsuits are all signals of an attempt to define the rules and boundaries. What are your thoughts on whether this just keeps moving at an almost uncontrollable pace, or will there be a specific set of efforts to define what those rules are?
It's a great question. And I don't know that I have the answer, but my sense is that the technology is increasing and increasing in speed very quickly. And it seems that it's exponential in speed. And as that happens, the rest of the world has to catch up. Now, if we're starting here and we make a little jump to here, maybe a lot of people can make that jump. But if we're making a jump to here, like, you're going to leave half the people behind. And my fear is that technology jumps so quickly that we're unable to keep up with it. And then there's a small group of people that can, but they're literally just the developers. And then you have governmental regulations happening at the same time, but they're really far behind and really slow. And this is one of the promises of Web3 and decentralization, is that, like, we're going to have this beautiful future where we have these identities that are not owned by corporations that are selling our identities for money. And suddenly we're going to have control over that. But that requires such an overhaul of the entire system that it's like, that's going to be its own hurdle to kind of get over. And so then the question becomes, the technology will keep developing so quickly, but the integration with the rest of the technology that it's in existing right now is going to be really slow. And I think that as these, like, what was that? Okay.
And Josh, to follow up on that point, it's almost as if large governments attempted to control it, then they are actually handing it over to non-governments to evolve it, which would create actually some of the science fiction that you're talking about.
Yeah, we can really learn a lot from science fiction. And I truly believe that Ready Player One is one of the most innovative, forward-thinking novels I've read, like, ever. Because the way that they talk about the role of, like, the metaverse in the Oasis in the film and the novel is just so articulate and just very close to home. And then we see it start happening.
Thank you.
Yeah, I saw Laura's hand
Go for it, Laura.
first.
You're on mute, Sudie.
We got a lot of Laura's and Lori here today, so we got to keep our ducks in a row. Thank you, Josh. This has been brilliant, stimulating.
Thank you.
I don't even know where to begin with all the thoughts I have rolling around in my head.
So great.
I also find it fascinating because I'm right in the throes of reading Creativity Inc. And I just see so much of this that has nothing to do with science fiction or any of the movies you named or the philosophers. And yet I see so many comparisons. And a minute ago, you said something about governments and owning us and like we're their little data sets. And that made me think of Henrietta Lacks and her DNA and how that was used. And that's not science fiction either, that's real life. And I was like, oh, we don't need science fiction anymore to explain or understand. But long preamble. Where I struggle with some of this in everyday life is, without going through your whole presentation and delivery, how do I help people, like, let's say clients, understand that they are only in one little quadrant and those other 3 quadrants exist? Like I find that a lot of the people that I deal with either think their way is the only way, or it's clearly right and everyone else is wrong, but that there are these different dimensions and considerations and paradigms, and please be open to, if not a convergence, just the mere existence. And I really struggle with that. So I love your physical layout of it, and physical and virtual and all that. But how do I help people understand you're stuck over here and there's all this other territory?
I mean, I think like I would just draw it, like, and I'm happy to share the presentation. I'll send it to Janet and she can share with the group. But I mean, yeah, it's getting everyone on the same page is hard, and it's kind of like this idea of like telling someone their baby is ugly. Like you're doing research on this like product, and you're like, oh, but it's like, it's their baby, but it's like, it doesn't work really well. And you kind of have to be like, well, look, there are all these other things that it could do. And these are the other things that people want it to do. And it does these things over here. So can we make it do some of these other things? And I think that it's about how we kind of present the findings that we have, or like position them in such a way that we're looking at it. And I think that this model is, and I think a lot about system theory also, and how if we look at it from a systemic perspective, there's a lot of things that are going on that if you're looking at it from an individual perspective, you're seeing just like one lens, one way of looking at the problem. But when you look at it from 5 different people, you get 5 different lenses, and then you start seeing like there's a system, and the system interacts with itself in these different ways. And so it's starting to kind of up-level the conversation is a way to look at it like, here's what we know about this thing. Now let's talk about the context of everything else. And in that context, that's where you can bring up some of these paradigms, because I think that paradigm thinking is akin to system thinking. And I'm coining that right now. I'm going to use that. Writing that down.
Yeah. Yeah, that's powerful, actually.
Huh.
I pass the baton to Lori.
Yeah.
And nice to see you, Lori.
It's been a little bit. It's been a
Hi,
minute.
Lori.
Hi. I wanted to jump on what you're talking about with governments, and people in the chat were commenting about how slow and how far behind governments inevitably will be when it comes to regulation or what have you. And I thought about this in the context even of our industry as market researchers. And we've got a thread going on in the MRx group about all the ways we're already experimenting with Gen AI and the tools that have been coming out. And because my company in particular does a ton of work with government, and because we are ISO certified for some of our processes, we actually have a natural kind of stop that we have to do, right? Because there are certain things that just wouldn't be allowed under certain contracts that restrict, we can go and play in the sandbox, we can try things out, but there's certain things that we just know just aren't currently going to be permitted, or we're going to have to go back to our clients and say, this is how we think this fits within the spirit of the contract, and we can go ahead and do this, or this is how we're protecting privacy, safety, security, whatever it is. And I thought about that in the sense of governments, because governments, yes, are always going to be behind in regulation and are always going to be less tech savvy than the people they're trying to regulate, given especially in North America, where a lot of legislators are in their 60s, 70s, and 80s. But I wonder if, I think about the European privacy regulations as perhaps a good example of how it could be, because they're really based on principle, not on specifics. They're based on the principle of this is the privacy our citizens are entitled to. And then the specifics come down from there. And I wonder if the same sort of thing is the way that governments need to approach this. This is the principle of how we, as part of that system, as part of that data set, as whatever it is, this is what we deserve as individuals, as citizens, as a society. And now it's up to the technology to prove that they're not in violation of those core principles. And that may be a way for governments to catch up, because they're never going to catch up if they try to regulate technology X.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I think that there are principles that exist today, some of them coming from science fiction, some of them coming from the medical industry, like this idea of just do no harm. Like, well, we could start with that one. I like that one. But I think that next is identity and ownership. And that's going to be a big important one.
The amount of work I've done on privacy and value of yourself as a data set in the last 5 years has been astronomical. Yeah.
I have a really basic question to close out. Sorry to bring everybody back down to earth, but I was just interested in your matrix, your 2x2. Like, I feel like it needs to be 3D, and within that, what would that third dimension be that is the foundational construct of this model? And was optimism and pessimism, I've been trying to get my head around, if that had been destructive and constructive, or advantageous and disadvantageous, or beneficial and, I don't know, whatever, dangerous, like, is that a third dimension that we should be worrying about? Because that's where it really matters in a way, is like, is this going to destroy us all, or is this going to build us up to be better? A bit like the mechanical parts, the technology I have in my body, which I'm grateful for. But so I was like, a third dimension, or would it be a replacement for optimism and pessimism?
Could I offer an idea to your third dimension?
Please.
I would say creativity. Creativity versus status quo, I think, is the third dimension, because I think the power of creativity will help move humanity forward in ways that is unimaginable today, but it's the power of creativity that will actually get people to move from, whether it's positivity, negativity, optimism, pessimism. It's that dimension, I think, that would make the difference, in my opinion.
I am very, very close. I agree with you. I think that creativity is a really interesting one. My slight nuance on that, when I was thinking about what could that third dimension be, is, does it exist within the current paradigm, or does it like lead to a paradigm shift? I think could be another dimension to consider in that particular framework, because there could be things that are fully existing in new paradigms. Like, I mean, NFTs create a new paradigm for digital ownership. Like, that is a brand new paradigm, and people don't have that paradigm yet. So that would be an example of like new paradigm. Whereas, I don't know, I can't think of, there's probably so many examples, I just can't think of one, but like there are other things that just exist that are in the current paradigm already. Like, I sign in with my Google account and that's my identity. There we go. That's an existing paradigm.
Yeah.
My email provider owns my identity for signing into other things.
Yeah.
Now that we get to be intentional about asking that question, should Google, or should my email provider, not to pick on Google, because Facebook, Meta, and other organizations do the same. But philosophically, should that cover government, or should that corporation be owning my identity and my ability to communicate and share that identity with other corporations? And that's the question. Asking the question is what helps us to really brainstorm how it could be different.
I see Lisa Strick and the participants, and Lisa worked at the Singularity University for a while. I'm sure you're familiar with Singularity University, but I love that their whole mission was you know, to create change that impacted, I can't remember whether it was at least 1 billion people. I think it was 1 billion people, and they would invest in these big ideas from people all over the world that could have that potential to impact 1 billion people positively. And in connection, I watched the Bill Gates documentary recently about his life and you know, The Mind of Bill, or whatever it was called. And I feel like there is a man who really tried to do that. He tried to create mini nuclear power plants that were, you know, self-regulating and safe, and, you know, water out of human waste that allowed there always to be water in places where there is never water. And he really invested in things that truly could have been those, you know, big differences. And I love the idea of taking everything you've been talking about to be this constructive force for good, and what power the things that we don't know yet could have in those. And I guess I'm old-fashioned. I like tangible paradigm shifts as much as I like the virtual ones that we're all living and breathing nowadays. So anyway, that was just you triggered my mind to think about all that again. My goodness, we could keep talking for hours. I want to be respectful of the recording time as well. So I'm going to stop the recording unless anyone has a powerful closing thought before I turn it off. But just
I have another third degree that I think would be very interesting, Josh, if you'd like to explore it. Two perspectives, especially since some of the movies were past, is one is probability and plausible from the perspective of what they made and could it be done, as well as the future of some of the things that they talk about. You know, the movies are 10, 15 years old, and now we're actually dealing with that. And that's there. So there's a real 3D prevention or 3D perspective to Jan's question to add to the plausibility, probability, or they were spot on and they were talking about the future 25 years ago and didn't even know, or they're way off and it's not even something that could be tangible in the next 10 to 15 years.
Love it.
Yeah, love it.
I mean, this was a pretty big paradigm shift, right? But
yeah. And we talk about it as a revolution.
Yeah. And I remember Star Trek, you know, they had these little things where they could talk to each other. You know, I mean, you all know, yeah. Anyway, well, thank you.
Sorry, I have one more little petition here. If we're going to think about a third dimension, I'm going to ask that another one be considered. And that is the old Cassandra story of our ability to persuade. Is it persuasiveness or not? And about a year ago when the Netflix movie came out, Don't Look Up, and it was about climate change and the world coming to an end. And in my head, I see this as the world of market research, is we have the data, nobody's listening, and we're having a hard time making our impact. And we're running around with all these reports and binders and better infographics than ever, and we can't convince anyone. But it's the oldest story of Troy and Cassandra, and that she is no longer able to convince anyone. And this was also mentioned in the book Creativity that I'm reading. So I have a lot of things floating around, but it's a very old thing, this ability to use what we have to shape and influence people. And I think that could be a dimension. So while you're considering possible dimensions, we may end up with a hexagram of some sort. It might not be three-dimensional.
Yeah, why
it's really cool.
Josh, we want 100-dimensional, please. I'm going to say thank you one final time. It was really amazing and thought-provoking. And I feel like you should be in Lisbon at the QRCA conference in the beginning of October as one of the most thought-provoking. So I will speak to Chris Houck, who couldn't be here today, because I feel like a lot of people would benefit from being this thoughtful.
Awesome. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And good night to you.